My name is Layla Darvish. I'm 36 years old, serving as a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy. And tonight, in front of Washington's most powerful elite, my family was about to remind me that to them, none of it carried any weight. My years of service were dismissed as a childish detour, a minor aside in the saga of the Darvish Empire. They thought they had me figured out. But they didn't know the other name. The one I had carved in the shadows. The one spoken only in classified rooms. They didn't know Oracle. And tonight, their ignorance was about to put lives on the line. Have you ever felt like the people closest to you treated your greatest sacrifices as if they were nothing? If you understand that sting, press 1 in the comments. And if you believe true power is built in the dark, not under the spotlight, tap that like button and stay here because this story belongs to you. Inside the grand hall of the National Portrait Gallery, the air was dense with perfume, money, and ambition. It was Politico's annual Power 100 Gala, a back-patting celebration for those who shaped the nation's agenda. And I, standing in immaculate navy whites, felt like a phantom drifting through their feast. I wasn't invited. I was on assignment. Just one silent strand in a vast net of security. My eyes traced the carved walls and exits, quietly calculating threats. My mind hummed with steady vigilance, until that hum broke when my father's hand gripped my arm. Armin Darvish, head of Darvish Global, king of concrete and influence, pulled me toward a senator whose loyalty he was almost certainly trying to purchase. A crystal glass of Macallan 25 glowed in his hand, the amber liquid catching the light like captured flame. His smile was flawless, rehearsed 1,000 times, a mask worn for the crowd. "Senator," he said, his voice booming with counterfeit warmth, "this is my youngest, Layla. She's still caught up in her little soldier phase." He chuckled as though revealing a charming family secret. "One day she'll set it aside and step into the real world at Darvish Global." Heat spread along my skin. The real world, as if the deserts I had marched across and the lives I'd shielded were just illusions. My mother, Sharon, appeared at his side, regal in Dior. Her power wasn't blunt like his. It was quiet and precise, a silken blade. She rested cool diamonds against my arm and whispered, "The uniform is stunning, John, but you and I both know your potential is far greater than this." The words cut as they always had, dismissing years of sacrifice, training, and endurance as something lesser. But discipline had taught me to wear a perfect mask. I offered a polite, thin smile and nodded. Then came my brother, Kian, the polished Harvard success story, heir to the throne. He clapped my shoulder with that same patronizing weight. "Sis, you look incredible. Straight out of Top Gun." He grinned, oblivious. "Enjoy it while it lasts. When you're ready to stop playing soldier, I've got a desk waiting at the company." He thought he was being kind. To me, it was just another reminder that they all believed my path was temporary, a vacation before I returned to their empire. Their contempt wasn't just spoken. It was a doctrine. I drew in a steady breath, the kind drilled into us in SEAL training. In chaos, become the calm. Breathe. Watch. My discipline cooled the anger rising in my chest. I was here to work. This was simply another hostile ground. And then the ground itself shifted. A voice broke through my earpiece, Farsi tinged with a Tehran accent. Just one phrase. "The eagle is descending into the nest." Ice filled my veins. The signal. An assassination happening now. In an instant, every insult from my family evaporated. Only instinct remained. The chatter, the clinking glasses, the smug smiles, all drowned into static. My senses narrowed to a blade. I was no longer Layla Darvish, the daughter they underestimated. I was Oracle. My eyes swept the hall. Past chandeliers, past glittering names. And there, among the servers, stood the danger. He wore a caterer's uniform, tray of champagne flutes balanced in hand. But his stance was wrong. Too controlled, too precise. The posture of someone trained to fight. His feet anchored, ready to strike. His gaze sharp and fixed, not on the guests but on the mezzanine balcony where Admiral Hayes, my old commanding officer, leaned deep in conversation. The nest. The target. No hesitation. No second-guessing. I cut through the crowd with a clipped, "Excuse me." When I reached him, my words were flat, urgent, and stripped of feeling. "Admiral. Threat. 3 o'clock. Codename Oracle. Move now." Admiral Hayes, who knew what that name meant from blood-soaked campaigns, didn't waste a second. His eyes flickered, but his body was already shifting, following me without question. 2 quick steps. A narrow corridor. A muted thump cracked the air behind us. The silence shot. Glass shattered with a sharp cry. I shoved Hayes into the passage just as marble splintered where his head had been an instant before. The bullet struck. But the mark was gone. I risked a glance back through the gap in the door. Already the glittering celebration was unraveling into chaos. But my eyes locked on my family. They stood frozen in place, their faces carved into masks of raw, instinctive terror. The arrogance, the smugness, the casual cruelty, they were gone, stripped away and replaced by a fear I had never witnessed in them before. My father's hand was empty. His glass, the symbol of control and prestige, lay shattered across the polished floor, glittering in 1,000 broken shards. The uproar of the gala eventually ebbed, replaced by the cold order of a federal investigation. We were moved to a makeshift command post, a sterile conference room tucked inside the gallery, now filled with agents in dark suits speaking into radios. Beyond the walls, police sirens cried through the Washington night. That sound was a trigger. It yanked me from the present, from the smell of gunpowder and splintered stone, dragging me 15 years backward into a paneled law office in Georgetown. A room that smelled of leather and old books. A room where another kind of violence had played out. I was 18 then, still carrying a fragile hope. That day was my grandfather's will reading. He had been a Marine, a tough-as-nails veteran who fought at Khe Sanh. And he was the only member of my family who ever truly recognized me. He saw the strength in me instead of the disappointment in my father's eyes. He was the one who taught me how to shoot, who handed me his worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, who would quote Patton saying, "Judge a man not by how he stands in comfort, but how he stands in the storm." He had promised me 2 things. His collection of medals, the Purple Heart, the Silver Star, and a modest trust. Not riches but enough. Enough to choose freedom. Enough, he told me with his rasping voice, for you to follow honor wherever it takes you. For an 18-year-old drowning under suffocating expectations, that promise was a lifeline. I sat in that office, clutching that hope, surrounded by my family in expensive black. The lawyer began to read, his voice tired. But before he reached my part, my father, Armin, cleared his throat. He didn't sound like a grieving son. He sounded like a CEO leading a hostile merger. "Gentlemen," he began, addressing the room as though it were a board meeting. "My father was sentimental, but we must be realistic." He gestured toward the medals. These military trinkets would bring greater honor displayed at the Marine Corps Museum. His tone dressed the theft in the clothing of tribute. Then his calculating gaze landed on me. "And as for Layla's small trust," he continued, emphasizing the word small like a dagger, "I propose it be merged into the family investment portfolio. Separating it only weakens its value. We are one family. We act as one." My brother, Kian, only 22 but already rehearsed as heir, nodded along, parroting his father's logic with a borrowed wisdom. Panic surged inside me. I tried to speak, but my mother's hand landed on mine. The gesture looked tender, but her grip was ice. "Layla, darling, your father is right," she whispered, her voice soft and smooth. "A young woman shouldn't cling to the past, to war and hardship. Your future is with us." She spoke of my future as if I were a stock to be managed. My weak protest, but Grandpa promised, was brushed aside like a child's tantrum. I was surrounded, outmaneuvered, betrayed by those who were meant to protect me. They weren't just stealing my inheritance. They were stripping away the only lifeline I had to a world where I felt seen, a world my grandfather had affirmed. His final gift of recognition was being erased. I tried once more, my voice barely audible. It was his wish. That's when my father's patience cracked. The mask of businessman slid away, revealing the ruthless man beneath. He looked straight at me, his eyes void of empathy. "Layla, stop being sentimental," he said, his voice flat and merciless. "Honor doesn't pay bills in Washington. Grow up." The words hit like a strike to the chest. They froze my blood and stilled my breath. It wasn't just about the medals or the money. It was a complete rejection of the values my grandfather had lived and died for. In their eyes, the love and lessons he gave me were worthless. Something inside me broke in that mahogany-paneled room. But something else took root. Ice in my heart, a hard resolve. I didn't argue again. I didn't shed tears. I just sat there alone. And I made a decision. I wouldn't fight them with words. I would prove them wrong with my life. I would build a fortress of discipline and honor so solid that their empire of greed could never touch it. I would become so good at my so-called little soldier game that one day my worth would be undeniable, untouchable, unbuyable. The sirens outside the present conference room slowly pulled me back from that memory, like a tide receding. The truth was cold and clear. The battle hadn't started tonight. It had begun 15 years ago in that office. Tonight was simply the first time the bullets were real. My father's dismissive voice from that day echoed in the sterile DC room, a bitter reminder of the world I had walked away from. To them my path was childish play. But that game had taken me to places they couldn't even imagine. My mind drifted again, not to marble halls but to sand and grit. To Thanksgiving in Al-Anbar province, Iraq 5 years earlier. The wind outside our tent screamed like a banshee, grinding sand into everything. Inside the air was heavy with dust, sweat and gun oil. 4 of us sat on upturned ammo crates, our feast spread on a makeshift table. Each of us with an emery pouch. I opened mine to leathery turkey slices and a lump of powdered potatoes. No pie. No cranberry. No laughter. Just the silence of the desert, cut only by the hiss of a radio. I looked at the faces of Martinez, Chin and Williams, grimy, exhausted but steady. They too had traded warm homes and families for this outpost at the edge of nowhere. In that quiet, in that shared sacrifice, I felt a bond deeper than blood. This was my real family, the one I had earned. I managed to connect a video call to my family's winter home. The signal was weak, flickering but clear enough. On the screen, their grand dining hall in Palm Beach, glowing under a massive chandelier, the table groaning with food. My father stood at the head, carving a golden turkey with practiced precision. My mother showed off her new Tiffany dinnerware. My brother, half drunk and grinning, grabbed the phone. "Layla. Look what you're missing." He swung the camera, parading their excess. "Mom's oysters are amazing this year." They laughed, chatting about ski trips, the stock market, galas. Their world was untouched, oblivious. It felt like a transmission from another planet. My father eventually took the phone. He squinted as if studying some distant oddity. "Hot over there?" he asked. "Drink water." That was it. His entire concern, as if I were a stranger. Then my mother leaned in. "Layla, you look too thin," she scolded. "You must eat more." As if I were at some spa retreat, not a war zone. They never asked if I was safe, if I was afraid, if I missed them. They didn't want to know. The call ended. The screen went black, leaving me with the dust, the dim light and a hollow cold in my chest. That was when my true work began. Fueled by coffee and bitterness, I stayed awake, headphones on, sifting through intercepted chatter. My ears, trained to separate noise from meaning, became my weapon. Hours of static, useless chatter. And then I caught it. 2 men speaking in an obscure dialect. They spoke of a red wedding planned for the Pilgrim's Road. A coded warning, a sophisticated IED ambush, targeting a high-value convoy. Admiral Hayes's convoy. The intelligence was paper-thin, almost nothing. Protocol demanded patience, more evidence, a second source. But my instincts, sharpened by years in the field, screamed this was real. I ignored the chain of command, a gamble that could end a career. I routed the intel through a trusted local contact, letting it resurface with the Admiral's security chief under an anonymous tag, Oracle. That was the first time I ever used the name. The convoy was rerouted with only minutes to spare. And then it came, a violent bloom in the desert night. A fireball erupted exactly where they would have been, the sand lit in searing orange. The destruction was total, but the lives were saved. No ribbons were pinned. No official praise mentioned Layla Darvish. But in the classified channels a phantom was born, the legend of Oracle. Admiral Hayes knew that night he owed his life to a ghost, a whisper in the static. And one day that debt would return to him. Later, standing outside our tent, the stars scattered like diamonds across the Iraqi sky, I understood what I had done. I had chosen the harder path, the right one. I had saved lives. And with that came a hard truth. The validation I'd longed for would never come from glittering dining rooms in Palm Beach. My worth wasn't theirs to measure. It was mine, defined here in the sand. My grandfather's words from Meditations echoed. The obstacle in the path becomes the path. The loneliness, the constant invisibility, it wasn't weakness. It was the fire that forged me. 2 days after the gala attack, my entire world had shrunk to the size of a windowless office. I was buried in a labyrinth of data, chasing shadows, tracing a name that whispered again and again from the ether. Origin, it wasn't just work anymore. It was obsession. Solitude had become familiar, but it still pressed heavy like a cloak around my shoulders. Then my phone vibrated. An unknown number. But I recognized the encrypted signature. Admiral Hayes's private line. I answered in a clipped tone. Darvish. Lieutenant Commander Darvish. His voice came through, not with the stiff precision of an admiral, but with warmth that startled me. I know the pressure you're under right now. He paused. My wife, Sarah, is making gumbo tonight. I want you at my house, 1900 hours. For a moment I couldn't respond. He seemed to sense my hesitation. Consider it an order, Layla, he added, his voice softening. But not from your admiral. From a friend. In my world, that kind of order didn't exist. It was a lifeline tossed into a dark, storming sea. For the first time since the attack, I felt a flicker of warmth, a glimpse of something beyond the crushing weight of family and duty. The Hayeses lived in Old Town Alexandria, a quiet historic neighborhood just across the river, far removed from marble and power. Their home wasn't a mansion like the ones I grew up in. It was a brick townhouse, 3 stories with black shutters and a red door that seemed to welcome me before I even knocked. The moment I stepped inside, the sharp edge of the past 48 hours began to dull. The air smelled of lemon polish, old books, and the slow simmer of food. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling, stacked with history, philosophy, and naval strategy. It wasn't a house meant to impress. It was a house meant to live in. Sarah met me at the door with kind eyes and a smile that reached them fully. She didn't extend a polished handshake. She wrapped me in a genuine embrace. Welcome, she said warmly. We're so glad you're here. Then with a playful grin she added, and no code names at the dinner table. Tonight you're Layla. She led me into the kitchen, where a pot of gumbo bubbled on the stove, filling the air with the savory blend of shrimp, sausage, and the holy trinity of onions, peppers, and celery. It felt impossibly normal. Comforting. Like stepping into another life. There was no judgment in that room, no silent measuring of my worth. Only peace, knowledge, and the promise of a meal shared in good faith. We sat at a plain wooden table. For 2 hours, not a single word was spoken about the attack, the investigation, or my family. Instead, James, he insisted I call him James, told stories about fly fishing in Montana, his eyes lighting up as he described the stubborn fight of a rainbow trout. Sarah, a retired history professor, learned of my love for ancient history and pulled me into a spirited debate about Hannibal's campaigns. She argued with fierce passion and, most importantly, treated my thoughts with respect, a courtesy I'd rarely known. They asked about the books I was reading, about where I wanted to travel after the Navy, about me, not the officer, not the code name, just Layla. And to my surprise I spoke. Really spoke. I even laughed. A true, unforced laugh I hadn't heard in years. In that warm dining room over bowls of rich gumbo, I realized what I'd been starving for all along. To be seen. When it was time to leave, James walked me to the door. We stood under the porch light, his voice now steady and grave. What you do in the shadows, he said, locking eyes with me, has shaped history in ways the world will never acknowledge. Don't you dare let anyone diminish that. My throat tightened, emotion pushing past the walls I'd built. It was the validation I'd been chasing for a lifetime, delivered simply and without condition. He rested a hand gently on my shoulder. Remember this, he said. This door is always open. This family is always here. Those words hit deeper than he knew. They weren't just comfort. They were antidote. They were belonging. I stepped out into the night. Washington was still dark. The threat still very real. But I was changed. I wasn't an island anymore. I wasn't alone. And that altered everything. The warmth of that night stayed with me only briefly, a borrowed shield against the cold weight of my work. By morning it was gone. replaced by the harsh glow of computer screens and the endless hum of data. I was back in my bunker, back in the hunt. The world narrowed again to a single focus, finding the ghost called Origin. With the quiet, unofficial backing of a small circle loyal to Admiral Hayes, I dug deeper into the tangled mess of shell companies and financial fronts tied to the attack. And one name surfaced again and again like a corpse rising from a swamp. Origin. On the surface, Origin looked like nothing. A dull, forgettable logistics consulting firm, built to blend in. Its face was a mask of corporate camouflage. But the deeper I peeled back the layers, the more sinister it became. It wasn't a company, it was a predator. A sprawling octopus with phantom subsidiaries and hidden holding firms stretching into the secrecy of the Caymans and the banking shadows of Panama. A network designed to move money and assets without leaving fingerprints. Their website was almost mocking in its emptiness. A blank wall of nothing. No names, no history, no details. Only a single logo. 3 sharp V's interlocked into an angular design that could be wings, or a spear. Stark, simple, hypnotic. It embedded itself in my mind like a warning. The predatory. Wrong. That knot in my stomach, the one that had kept me alive in Iraq, tightened. The same instinct that whispers just before an ambush. I used the gala's ongoing security audit as my cover and requested full access to my father's temporary office and every scrap of material tied to the conference. A long shot. But I had to know. The suite at the Willard wasn't just an office. It was a throne. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Washington Monument. Brochures and strategic plans for Darvish Global stacked neatly on a polished mahogany desk, each one a monument to my father's obsession with empire. I worked through the papers with cold precision, pushing aside the pang of guilt. Then, inside a leather portfolio, I found it. A draft partnership agreement between Darvish Global and a European entity, Vidian Group. A name I had never heard before. At first glance it was boilerplate legal text, dense, boring, written to lull the eye. But when I turned to the final page, my chest locked. There, faint as a watermark, almost invisible, was the logo. The 3 V's. My pulse hammered. My breath vanished. For 10 seconds the world tilted, the city outside dissolving into silence. And then I saw it, in the margin, my father's impatient handwriting. Asterisk, confirm press credentials for their delegation. Keen to handle. Asterisk. My hands shook. A wave of nausea crashed over me. The sniper had entered the gala with a forged press badge. The clean vantage point, the unobstructed shot. It had been handed to him. And this note, this casual scrawl from my father, sealed it. My brother had carried out the detail, thoughtlessly, obediently greasing the wheels. They hadn't just dismissed my career. They had paved the way for an assassin. What had always been a private wound, a quiet family betrayal, had spilled into the open and bled into national security. A cold fury sliced through me, but fear wasn't far behind. If my father was entangled in this, even blindly, then the threat wasn't distant. The threat was close. The enemy had keys to my childhood home. I snatched my secure phone, fumbling at the keypad, denial screaming in my head. There had to be another explanation. Coincidence. Misinterpretation. Anything but this. I typed Vidian Group into the dark web. The results crawled in. A bland financial article, a press release. And then a photo. A charity golf tournament at Mar-a-Lago. My father, beaming in the sun, clasping hands with a Middle Eastern financier whose face I knew too well. I had seen it in intel briefings. A man on the U.S. sanctions list for funding extremist networks. Their handshake was easy, familiar. And behind them, slightly blurred, stood another figure. Smiling faintly. The same face I had matched to Origin's stripped-down employee roster. My stomach dropped. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a network, threads woven from Florida golf courses to Middle Eastern battlefields. And there at its center was my father. Armin Darvish. Smiling with the spider. The floor seemed to disappear beneath me. The CIA has a saying, bitter and cynical. Asterisk, admit nothing. Deny everything. Make counter-accusations. Asterisk. And I suddenly knew, I was staring into the faces of masters at that game. Deny everything. Make counter-accusations. I was facing masters of that dark art. But this wasn't a game anymore. This was a betrayal so profound, so absolute, It threatened to shatter everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, and the very country I had sworn to defend. The floor of my father's office felt like it had dissolved into nothing beneath me. The photo from Mar-a-Lago burned in my mind, a toxic image of betrayal, a primal instinct. A screeching alarm in my soul told me I was exposed, that the war had just followed me home. I didn't think. I just ran. I bolted from the Willard, leaving the investigation and the protocols behind, and raced through the DC traffic toward my apartment in DuPont Circle. I had a backup hard drive there, paper files from my time in the Middle East, evidence, my own personal insurance policy. The entire drive, my mind, was a repeating loop of a single desperate prayer. Please let me be wrong. Please let this just be paranoia. But the moment I saw my front door, I knew I wasn't wrong. There were faint, fresh scratches around the lock, almost invisible to a civilian eye. But to me they screamed forced entry. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pushed the door open. The violation was chilling in its precision. This wasn't a smash and grab. My laptop was still on the desk, my jewelry untouched in its box. This was a professional job. They had tossed the place but methodically searching for something specific. It was clear what they'd taken. My spare hard drive was gone from its hiding place, and a file cabinet containing my old paper records from the Middle East campaign stood open and empty. They had stripped me of my proof. But that wasn't what made me freeze. That wasn't what stopped the air in my lungs. It was what they left behind. On my coffee table, placed dead center in the room, was a single photograph. It was my favorite picture in the world. Me at 22, beaming with pride on the day of my Naval Academy graduation. My grandfather standing beside me. His arm was around my shoulder, his own face weathered and kind, lit up with a joy that outshone the Maryland sun. It was a perfect moment, a sacred memory of the one person who always believed in me. And they had taken a knife to it. A single, deep, vicious slash ran across the photograph, cutting through my grandfather's smiling face. A deliberate, hateful act of desecration. It was a message. And just to make sure I understood who sent it, lying beside the ruined photo was a single paper clip twisted carefully, malevolently, into the 3V logo of origin. This wasn't a warning. This was a declaration of war on my soul. They knew my pressure points. They knew what would hurt me more than any physical threat. They didn't just want my silence. They wanted to break my spirit. They wanted to show me they could reach into the most sacred corners of my heart and defile them. The disciplined calm I'd spent a lifetime cultivating shattered. The anger I'd buried for years, at my family's dismissals, at their cold, transactional world, erupted like fire. This was their empire built on greed. And now they had touched the last sacred thing. My grandfather. Shaking with fury, I called my father. He answered curtly. They broke into my apartment, I hissed. Your partners. They desecrated Grandpa's picture. A long silence. Then his voice, cold, clipped, more so than father. Stop being dramatic, Perry. Deals come with risk. You chose this path. Handle it yourself, and stay out of my business. He hung up. The dial tone buzzed like betrayal itself. I slid to the floor, broken, staring at my grandfather's ruined face. For the first time since childhood, tears came, tears of grief, rage, and loneliness. But when they dried, something harder remained, steel resolve. I reached for his copy of Meditations. Inside was Roosevelt's Man in the Arena. I read aloud, "It is not the critic who counts, but the man whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood." My voice grew firmer with each word. They want a war? I whispered. They'll get one. In their arena. I was no longer just Lieutenant Commander Perry Flint. I was Oracle again, free of their rules. I grabbed a burner phone and messaged Castle, the ex-NSA prodigy who owed me a debt. I need a key for a locked door. Cashing in my chit. His reply, the usual place. 1 hour. At a crowded coffee shop he slid me a USB drive. A worm, he murmured. Plug it into their network. It'll clone encrypted files and vanish in 60 seconds. One shot only. I pocketed it. My first weapon. Then I locked myself in my command post for 36 hours, fueled by coffee and rage, combing through gala surveillance. I tracked the sniper, cross-referenced every face, isolated his burner phone. At 3:14 a.m. I found it, a call placed after the attack. Not to a ghost, but to a number registered under my brother's assistant. The puzzle snapped into place. Origins deal with Flint Industries, the forged press pass, and now a direct line to my brother's office. Motive, means, and link. All complete. The question wasn't if I would expose them, but how. Quiet FBI reports would bury the truth. My father thrived in shadows. I would drag him into light. The stage was already set. The conference's closing gala, with my father giving a keynote on legacy and integrity. Behind him, Origin's logo would glow on a massive screen. Their arena. My moment. That night, the Willard Ballroom gleamed with power. Senators, CEOs, journalists. My father stood at the podium, basking in triumph. My mother and brother glowed at the head table. They were about to witness his empire collapse. Admiral Vance emerged, cutting him off. His voice filled the room. A story of unseen heroism, of Oracle saving American lives in the desert and again in Washington days earlier. The crowd leaned in, captivated. "Who is Oracle?" a reporter shouted. Vance didn't answer. He simply turned his gaze toward me. I stepped from the shadows, the room gasping as the spotlights hit. I walked straight down the aisle, eyes locked on my father. For the first time, fear flickered in his. I stopped before the stage. My voice cut the silence like glass. "The daughter you underestimated." The ballroom exploded, not with a bomb but with cameras. My father's empire shattered in 1,000 flashes. The fallout was swift. Headlines blared my name in code name. FBI raids followed. Flint Industries stock crashed. The glittering dynasty cracked under truth's weight. I watched it all from my apartment, relief mixing with emptiness. I had won, but the cost was final. The fantasy of family. My brother Silas called, his voice stripped of arrogance, trembling with fear. "I didn't know, Perry. It was just paperwork." For a moment, pity stirred, but I gave him clarity. "You must choose, the truth or Dad's lies." I hung up. Later, Admiral Vance called. My father, under FBI questioning, gave up Origin's European contact. Not an apology but an admission in his own language. Surrender. A week later, my mother's email arrived, long, manipulative, cloaked in concern. She ended with, "Family must stick together." I replied, "I agree. That's why I'm having dinner with Admiral Vance tonight. I hope Dad tells the FBI everything." The boundary was set, final and unshakable. 2 weeks later, I ran by the Potomac. For once, I wasn't running from anything. My breath was just breath. I realized freedom wasn't the absence of pain. It was breaking free from the prison pain builds. At the river's edge, I saw him. My father, smaller now, aged, shoulders slumped. He whispered, "Your grandfather would have been proud of you." Not an apology but an acknowledgement. It was enough. "Go, Dad," I said softly. "The FBI might be watching." He nodded and walked away, a man who had lost everything, and maybe rediscovered a fragment of his soul. Days later, a plain envelope arrived. Inside, a joker card. "Cross it. Oracle, a new game has begun." Once this would have terrified me. Now it only confirmed what I already knew. The fight never ends. But I wasn't fighting for approval anymore. I wasn't proving anything. This is who I am. The game may change. The player does not. And Oracle is always ready. I truly appreciate you staying with us through her story. Her evolution, from being dismissed as a daughter to commanding her own arena, shows that the strongest power we carry is the one forged quietly inside our own struggles. If tales of resilience, justice, and the strength to draw firm boundaries speak to you, make sure to subscribe to Revengeous so you won't miss the next chapter. And share in the comments. What moment in Layla's journey gave you the greatest sense of strength?